morning, boys and girls. Miss Lidoff here. So at this point, we have been informed that our school buildings will be closed for the remainder of the school year. However, your teachers will still be posting activities in your Google Classroom. If you need a hard copy of the enrichment packets, those will be available at the Purvis High School cafeteria in the filing cabinets. And as always, you can work on your Lexia, MobyMax, and AR from home. Your teachers love seeing you working and keeping your mind sharp and ready for third grade. And so today I'm going to pick up with the next chapter in Blizzard of the Blue Moon by Mary Pope Osborne. Last time we left off in chapter 2. The title of chapter 2 was Who Are They? And so at the end of the chapter there were some people following Jack and Annie, and they suspect that it is Teddy and Kathleen. And so in chapter 3 it is titled Lost in Central Park. Jack and Annie kept walking until they came to the ice pond again. "We've been here before," said Jack. "We're going in circles. How do we get out of the park?" "We have to try to walk in a straight line," said Annie. Annie and Jack struggled on. Jack kept looking back, trying to catch sight of Teddy and Kathleen again. But it was getting harder and harder to see anything. Wet snow kept sticking to his glasses. Snow had blown up the sleeves of his jacket, under his neck scarf, and into his mittens. "Yikes!" said Annie. She grabbed Jack's arm. "Look!" A huge, wolf-like dog stood on a ledge above them, his mouth open. "Whoa!" said Jack. The dog didn't move. He stood perfectly still. Annie laughed. "Oh, he's a statue," she said. She ran to a plaque under the dog statue, brushed off the snow, and shouted to Jack. "His name is Balto. In 1925 he carried medicine 600 miles through a blizzard in Alaska." "That's really great," said Jack. "But how do we get out of the park?" "Well, if we follow this path, it's bound to lead somewhere," said Annie. Jack followed Annie up a wide path. They walked and walked, past a snow-covered outdoor stage and a fountain with a statue of an angel. Raising her outspread wings, the angel seemed about to fly away. "Which way now?" said Jack. 2 paths led away from the angel fountain, one to the right, one to the left. "I don't know," said Annie. "Pick one." Jack headed to the left. Annie followed. They passed a frozen lake and walked over an arched bridge. Jack kept his eyes on the ground and walked and walked and walked. Every time he lifted his head, the snow felt like needles against his skin. Jack tried to keep walking in a straight line, but the path they were following began twisting and turning like a maze. Different paths branched off, curving this way and that. Jack remembered information from their research book. The park has 32 miles of winding footpaths. "We have got to get off these paths," he shouted to Annie, "or we'll be lost in Central Park forever." Annie didn't answer. "Annie!" Jack shielded his face from the cutting wind and looked back. He didn't see her. Jack turned around and around, looking for Annie, but he couldn't see anything. The world was completely white. "Annie!" he cried. Had she gone off on another path? Was she lost? "Annie!" She could wander around in the storm for hours, thought Jack. She could freeze to death. I have to find her. Jack tried to stay calm. He took a few breaths. A rhyme, he thought. He couldn't remember which magic rhymes were left. He struggled to unbuckle his briefcase. His fingers felt frozen. He pulled out the book and hunched over it, trying to shelter it from the storm. He wiped his glasses off and read, "Turn into ducks." That wouldn't help. "Pull a cloud from the sky." That would only make things worse. "Find a treasure you must never lose." Is Annie a treasure? Jack wondered. He'd always thought of a treasure as something super valuable, like gold or silver or rare jewels. But right now, Annie seemed more valuable than any of those things. She seemed like the most valuable thing in the world. Jack found the rhyme and shouted, "Treasure forever must never be lost. Umata cow, umata bast." Jack! Jack whirled around. Annie was standing right behind him. "There you are," she said. "I was afraid you got lost." "I wasn't lost," said Jack. "You were lost." He slipped the rhyme book back into his briefcase. "Not me, you," said Annie. "Whatever," said Jack. "Just stay near me now." He took her hand and gripped it tightly. "Okay, let's figure out what to do." "Wait, is that a castle over there?" said Annie. "Oh, what?" said Jack. "A castle! Look!" Peering through the storm, Jack saw a small castle sitting on top of a snowy hill. A light burned in a window. "A castle in Central Park?" Jack said. "That's weird." "Let's go see if anyone's inside," said Annie. "Maybe they can help us. People in a castle might know about unicorns." "Or at least know how to get out of the park," said Jack. Jack and Annie struggled up the stone steps that led to the castle. At the top of the steps, Jack glanced back at the park. He could barely make out two figures in the snow, one in a dark cape and one in a raincoat. "Them! It's them!" said Jack. A cloud of wind-driven snow blew over the couple. Jack kept looking, eager for another glimpse of the two young enchanters, but the snow hid everything in sight. "They'll find us," said Annie. "Come on." She pushed open the door to the castle and led the way inside. The door slammed shut behind them. Jack and Annie stood in a dimly lit hallway. "Hello! Who's there?" a man called. "Jack and Annie," shouted Annie. A tall, thin man came down a curving stone stairway. He wore an old-fashioned blue-striped suit. "Goodness! 2 children?" he said. "What are you doing here on a day like today?" "We got lost in the park," said Jack. "My name's Jack, and this is my sister Annie." "Pleased to meet you. I'm Bill Perkins," said the man. "Welcome to Belvedere Castle." "What is this place?" asked Annie. "The castle was built in 1869, said Mr. Perkins. "It was meant to be a delightful surprise when one wandered the park. Today, it's a delightful surprise with a nature observatory and weather instruments inside." "Weather instruments?" said Jack. "Yes, I've come from the U.S. Weather Bureau to check them," said Mr. Perkins. "I'm afraid right now our data is telling us that the weather's undergoing a rapid and terrible change." Jack shivered in his damp clothes. "Our data is telling us the same thing," he said. "A storm has blown in from the Midwest, bringing wind and snow," said Mr. Perkins. "But after nightfall, things will get worse. Another storm is coming up from the south, gathering speed on its way." "That sounds serious," said Annie. "It's worse than serious," Mr. Perkins said. "It's disastrous. After dark, the two systems will meet and create a monster blizzard. It could be the worst in New York history, even worse than the blizzard of '88. Jack caught his breath. "Poor New York," said Annie. "Ah, yes. It's the last thing our great city needs during these hard times," said Mr. Perkins, shaking his head. "Excuse me, but I have a question," said Annie. "Do you know if there's a full moon tonight?" "Well, yes, there is," said Bill Perkins. "You won't see it, though, not through those storm clouds. Actually, it'll be the second full moon this month." "A blue moon?" said Annie. "You're exactly right. A blue moon indeed," said Mr. Perkins. "I have another question," said Annie. "Do you know where we can find—" Any unusual animals? Jack interrupted. On public display somewhere in New York City? Well, your best bet in New York would be the Bronx Zoo, said Mr. Perkins. They display all kinds of animals from all over the world. Great, said Annie. How do we get there? What? You can't go to the zoo today, said Mr. Perkins. Not in this storm. No, of course not, Jack said quickly. But if we ever decide to go to the zoo in the future, how would we get there? Well, the best way would be to take the West Side IRT, said Mr. Perkins. What's that? Said Jack. A subway line that runs up the West Side, said Mr. Perkins. The number 2 train on that line will take you to the Bronx Zoo. Oh, great. Thanks for everything, said Jack. We'd better get going now. He and Annie started toward the door. Wait, there's a telephone upstairs. Let me ring up your parents. Perhaps they can come get you, said Mr. Perkins. Well, said Annie, we haven't lived here very long, and we don't have a telephone yet. She's right, said Jack, but it's not too far to where we live. We just need to get out of the park to the street. To the West Side, said Annie. Yeah, the West Side, said Jack. Can you tell us how to get there from here? Certainly. Mr. Perkins opened the door. Wind and snow blasted inside as he pointed to the right. Cross the terrace and then walk down the stairs to a path. That path will take you out of the park to 81st Street, he said. Hurry home now. We will, said Jack. Thanks a lot, Mr. Perkins, said Annie. And she and Jack headed back out into the blizzard. And that is the end of chapter 3. Hope you enjoyed and hope you will continue reading with us. Bye-bye.